Hello, everybody. This is NGO Soul and Strategy, and I'm Tosca. I've got a special episode today. I'm looking forward to this. The International Tunneling Association has been a client of mine. I like working with professional associations because it's a nice complement to the work that I do with INGOs or with US domestic nonprofits. You may think, what is an International Tunneling Association all about? Well, you'll learn about that in a moment, although that's not going to be the core of our conversation. I did this work in my capacity as an associate of Umentum, and Umentum for short supports NGOs across the world with their operational excellence. And Umentum has supported ITA with an overall organizational health assessment, which I was a part of. And then we later also helped with the improving the quality and the rigor of the selection process for a new executive director. And all of this work allowed me to work with somebody who I have enjoyed working with. And that is Arnold Dix, who is today our guest. And he is the current president of ITA, the International Tunneling Association. And when I say enjoy, I mean enjoy. Arnold is one of the sharpest, but also one of the most funny and incisive colleagues that I have worked with. He has a unique approach and style, which I appreciate, and he is not shy to speak his mind. Today, we're going to address what he learned in his 3 years as president of the International Tunneling Association about how to lead and manage change. So with that, Arnold, very welcome to you.
Greetings to you, Tosca. What a lovely introduction. You have to be my new bestest friend. That's very kind of you.
I mean it. Yeah, I mean all of it. You know, I'm Dutch, so we tend to be genuine when we talk.
You've just provided me with a window. I'm blushing. This is a fantastic start to our podcast.
Good. Well, let's see. Hopefully, it won't go downhill from here.
Nah, no. Let's do this.
So Arnold's bio, dear listeners. So Arnold's LinkedIn profile, he calls himself the tunnel guy, which I think is already a good start. He is the president, as I said, of the International Tunneling Association. He's also the president of the Underground Works Chamber, which I imagine, Arnold, is that in Australia, your home country?
Yeah, that's in Australia. That's a legal thing.
A legal thing, and because you are a lawyer or barrister, as it's called in Australia, you have been self-employed for a long time before you. You've been involved in ITA for a long time, but you were primarily self-employed as a lawyer. You've worked in risk and technical consulting with regard to underground infrastructure, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you to just explain for lay people what kind of things we should be thinking about with that term. You've been involved as a lawyer in the protection of such underground infrastructure, but also the environmental impacts. You've been a volunteer for environmental defenders in Victoria, Australia, and you have 25,000 followers on LinkedIn due to your high profile, your thought leadership, and your video content as well. And why don't you give a quick anecdote about how you got to that 25,000 followers? Because I think, and what it says about the direction in which you've tried to change ITA.
Thank you, Tosca. It's a very, very interesting question. And can I also just add one little thing? I am a professor of engineering as well.
Thank you for correcting.
And originally a mining geologist. So I think that I'm a bit of a polymath. But I tend to hide that. I should tell you that. Now,
yeah, no, absolutely.
This whole social media thing, 25,000 people on LinkedIn, that's absolutely brand new to this presidency. And it came about because when I was elected president, there was a period between the election and me taking over. And I reached out to my young members in Australia and said, what do they want from me? Because very much part of my election campaign and policies, because I think I was the first person ever to have policies that I disclosed prior to election at ITA. So I had a policy document that I'd circulated, and part of the policy changes that I wanted to implement was making us relevant. And so I then contacted the young members and said, what does that actually mean to you? And what is it you want to see from me? And they came back social media. And I didn't even know how to spell it. So I said, well, teach me this animal. What is this sorcery,
Mm, mm,
this strange thing? And so they gave me some online lessons. And I can summarize it straight away. They said, make your posts spontaneous. Write them yourself. Do not
mm,
have some fancy corporate person make them all beautiful.
mm,
Keep them in the positive voice and have something new. Always have
mm.
something new and see what happens. And well, 25,000 followers later,
In 3 years, it paid
20,
off. Yes.
yeah. So I
Yeah,
think,
interesting.
so yeah, so in terms of change and what that's meant is I, I've been able to, as president through my social media presence, love me or hate me, my voice has been heard. And so I haven't been hiding in the shadows. I've very much led with my chin.
That's right. That's right. We're going to talk more about this. But let's just, for our listeners' sake, let's go back to the basics. So, the International Tunneling Association, what is its mandate and mission, please? And how, in what ways, second question, is ITA a part of civil society? Because that might not be obvious to everybody in the beginning.
I know it's a very difficult thing for me to imagine that someone doesn't know what we do. So I, for that one or two people out there who are listening to, who don't know what the International Tunnelling and Underground Space Association is, I'll tell you what it delivers. It delivers clean water. It delivers sewage treatment, environmental
Mhm.
protection, transport. Uh, it's about delivering uh, dignity to billions of people around the world through underground spaces, underground infrastructure. And that's what our vision and mission and everything else is linked to. And without reciting the words, and I have got the website open on the other screen that I could refer to and recite, but in a sense, it doesn't matter. What what we're all about is we're those nerdy digging, building, operating major infrastructure people who actually believe, really believe,
Mhm.
that leaving politics to one side, there's this commonality of humans in the world and about the dignity of being a human in the world today. And you need clean water and you need something done with your sewage and you need transport. And if if you have those things, you have at least half a chance of having a decent life. So
Interesting.
with it's
So
yeah, so
you're
that's
linking it immediately, the mission, not just the activities,
hmm,
but to poverty, to
yep.
access to resources, right? To inequality. You've also done interesting work on women engineers in
Yep.
underground projects, right?
One of my policies to be elected straight up. Yeah. We're
Tell
trying to
us a little
bring
bit more.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, we traditionally are a group of old men banging on about tractors and trucks and dirt and rocks and all that sort of stuff and
Yeah.
celebrating each other, patting each other on the back. And part of my election was enough of that. But enough. Like, we as an NGO, we not only have to bring these things to the people of the world, particularly those least able to deliver it themselves, like we have to take it. We need this to be a platform for all peoples of the world to better themselves. We need you for the women. This has to be a place that they can exercise their expertise, bring their particular talents, and that means sitting at our tables. It means for even economic equity reasons, like even our organisation. It
Hmm.
shouldn't matter how rich or poor you are, your voice should be heard because, of course, the poorest countries have got the largest populations of people without clean water and sewage and transport.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it's huge, been a huge push.
Yeah, and I remember you recently, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but just to mention as an anecdote, you spoke on LinkedIn about a task force or a project where only, I think, Indian women engineers, right, would work.
Yep.
Do I have this right? Would work
Yeah.
so that
Well,
they
yeah,
would be less subject to sexual abuse and other things like that, correct?
yeah, yep, that's right. And so tangible stuff. So instead of talking in the general, we as the tunneling people, because we're pretty practical, when you spend your whole life digging holes, like you can be as theoretical as you want, but let's make this practical. So in my own country, we're now forming the world's first entirely female tunnel boring machine crew, and that's
Oh, that's in
everything.
Australia, not in
So
United
that's
Kingdom.
the Australian one, yep. And but we've attracted people from all around the world because part of the diversity and inclusion that we identified was for people from other countries wanting to work in Australia. So it actually was identified as career paths for say women in India or women in wherever. So we've got islander people in this part of the Pacific who've
Hmm.
applied. We've and also at my organisation ITA are encouraging other countries to do this within their country,
Nice.
not because we're saying you should have all women tunnel boring machine crews in the end as the end game,
Hmm.
but to demonstrate tangibly that there is
Hmm.
no barrier to women in our sector for any reason other than bias. Right, so we're sort of eliminating all of the nonsense that's associated with it. Because of course, a lot of men like to define themselves as big and tough because they're in the underground, like beating their chest. Interestingly, what I've discovered is the nuances of the gender issue in the underground are much more complicated than I thought. In fact,
Mm.
I I was biased because I then started to have really interesting conversations with religious leaders and other scholars about the relationship between the underground and gods and
Mm.
superstitions,
Mm.
and that in many cultures there's also been a history of exploitation of women and children in the underground. And part of the reforms that had occurred were to take women and children out of the underground as slavery or very exposed labour. And so inadvertently, we were aggravating more historical problems
Ah,
about gender where the reform was removing the women from a position of exploitation. And so there was this, it was like a double loop.
I know.
Yeah, and so that is fascinating. So I'm working with some scholars to try and produce a document on the multiple dimensions of the gender bias issue
Mm.
that so this is anyway. So sorry,
Yeah,
you asked about it. It gets me very excited, and
I can see
because
that. Yeah, and rightfully so.
yeah,
And
and
rightfully
and
so. Yeah,
I'm learning so much about it.
I
But
bet.
I'm on, and so because we've got the initiative, because we're actually doing stuff, it's revealing the nuances of a subject which previously you might have thought, and I'll use the term binary. It's probably not a good one in this context, but it's not as simple as I first thought.
Right,
But in
right.
the end, all female tunnel boring machine crew, it is happening. And women from around the world are taking this on, organisations are taking it on. It's becoming a KPI in projects around the world, like
Nice.
you actually have to do it. So it's
And
changed.
if I can turn to our listeners, you can see here how what at face value might be a very technical professional association actually has a deeply broadly societal function if it wants to be, right?
Yep.
And that is where I want to go now because it is my perception that you and the executive council, which is the ITA's term for their board, basically wanted to drive ITA more, well, in a number of directions, but one of them being more explicitly connected to societal issues, right? You have a relationship also to the United Nations and to the SDGs, etc., and you wanted to make that um, more overt in a number of ways. So tell us a little bit to start on your change agenda. And when I say you, I don't mean just you, because as you also said in our conversation before this recording, of course you did this work with a whole bunch of um, change agents with you, right? And the executive
Yep.
council being a very important one, and others, right? And you have a new executive director now, etc. Change agents, change champions. So let's talk about the learning that you did about the change agenda. What did you set out to change in ITA when you came in?
So the organization basically was 50 years old, and it had begun as a Western European grouping of basically underground superpowers with
Mm-hmm.
a probably an unspoken agenda to influence the world. So it became a vehicle to influence the world, to expand the industry, which was really developing primarily in Central Europe and or Western Europe, and also the US to some extent as well. So, and well, Australia as well. But mostly it was driven by this UN NGO thing that seemed to be happening in the 70s. Like it seemed to be a bit. I've looked at all well, a lot of the NGOs in our area, and a lot of them seem to hatch around the 70s. So it was
Mm.
peace, not war, and it was let's have an NGO for that. So there seemed to be a whole
Yeah.
lot pop up. It was, some sort of a weird NGO time. But the executive council, or as you say, our board, the board that I'm president of, we collectively felt that the world has changed. And whatever the agenda was, and whatever the appetite for NGOs was in 1970 or thereabouts, that appetite it's moved on. And
Yes.
we, I think I can speak for my board. We actually think the 1970s style NGO is a dinosaur and will die. So
Mm.
if you've got one of them and you're listening to this show, no amount of internal reform is going to sort you out. You are dead, my friends, because the world is sick and tired of being told what to do by bombastic organisations with no accountability, based out of a grubby little office in Geneva, that think that their entitlement to do whatever it is they do is born out of some, gift from God or whatever, because of some higher moral principle that they're for. We actually think the world is sick of that. They don't want to hear it. They're tired. That narrative that it's gone. And if you're still surviving, it means you probably were saving well for your 50 years. But the writing's on the wall. You're over. So this group, we believe that the future of the NGO is
Yeah.
in making the world a better place by actually doing stuff, by actually being relevant, by actually engaging, not going just to conferences and talking to each other and giving each other awards, as fun as that might be, but actually doing stuff. So, and what we discovered, and I didn't know that this would happen, is talking like this and actually saying these SDGs out there, how do they impact us? What is it
Mhm.
that we can do? How is it that future generations of human beings could benefit from our activity? How can we engage in the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion? How do we extend the reach of clean water, sewerage, and transport to the world? How do we enable generations of young people to engage with us? How do we make seats available at our table to nations we don't even like? And I mean that like, hello, we're different and we're never going to agree. How do we do that? Because in that, we become relevant. In that, people actually want to talk to us.
Mm.
Otherwise, we're just banging on and we're righteous and all the rest of it. So initiatives that for example I took, which were really difficult, all these wars. I don't know, Tosca, you probably haven't noticed because you're a nice person, but the the world's at war at the
Yeah.
moment, and the we can talk about it in beat around the bush. I think you're based in Canada, is that right? Yeah.
US.
Oh, you're in the US. Oh, well, did you hear you're taking over Canada? And and Greenland, and anyway, oh, somewhere else as well. I mean, what sort of like, so have to push all of that noise to
Yeah.
one side and go, how, and this is and this was an area where I had to show leadership. And I would say, I will not tolerate, zero tolerate the politics of this crazy world that's outside getting
Hmm.
in the way of our mandate to make the world a better place for the people wherever they might be, whatever God they worship, whatever political system they're in, no matter who they're fighting,
Hmm.
unless there's a sanction at the UN that says they can't sit at our table, they are welcome. And that's hard because in an organisation with a strong Western European history
Hmm.
and with a strong US and Australia presence,
Hmm.
and given, again, you probably haven't noticed because you're a nice person, but I'm pink and I look like I'm European, so Anglo sort of person, and I'm
Hmm.
male. So that should, everyone knows how I'll behave. I went into bat for every country, every if there's not a UN sanction, I want them at this table. I want to hear their voice. And
Yeah.
so that meant Russia, Israel, Iran, Pakistan, just to start the ball rolling. You're welcome. Now, that's tough.
And
And
not
yet,
just you're welcome, I think, would it be fair to say, or not? Am I projecting when I said that it was under your leadership, your board, and you, that one of your objectives has been to not just diversify the voice, but also the mm, power, decision rights, authority, etc., of not just traditional members, because this is a membership
mm,
organization, right? As you said,
mm,
Europe, America, Australia were dominant, right? And the commercial interests behind
mm,
that, of course,
mm,
were
mm,
also
yeah,
dominant. But you wanted to increase not just the voice, but also the agency and the presence, if you will, of voices outside those regions. Is
yeah.
that fair to say or not?
Absolutely. And one of the leadership lessons that I've learned from that is incredibly threatening to many people
Yeah.
because they um, rightly, understandably, and predictably have got mechanisms of influence, both overt and covert, within the
Yes.
organisation that allows them to pursue their own sort of local agendas. And we've been unpicking that, not without a lot of kicking and screaming, but we're unpicking it. And the measure of the success, and to your leaders who are listening, what I think is the measure of whether we're being successful is we're now seeing regional alliances forming within our member nations who are creating their own regional voices that then report to us as the global organisation. So we've now got a European alliance. We've now got an Asian alliance. We've now got a Balkans alliance. We've now got what's the beginning of an African alliance. So they've got various names, but
Hmm.
in substance, regional groupings now of member nations. And initially, some people were scared of that.
Mm.
And I was celebrating it and publicly celebrating it. And so, for some people within the organisation, they were scared that I was celebrating it because they saw it as a loss of central power of the main overarching global organisation. And I argued, no, this is a symptom of us becoming even more relevant because in becoming global, if we're forcing our regional members to form then regional groups that then themselves are responding to us, we're actually creating a better ecosystem for the exchange of information and ideas. And what we're seeing now in the third year of my presidency is
Hmm.
those member nation groups are organising themselves on special subjects that we as the central organisation set with regional task forces that report back into us. So there's a common European position, there's a common Asian position, there's a common African position. And so it means we're changing, but I think it means we're changing into something truly globally representative. That's got to
Right.
be a good thing because that's the mission. If
Yes.
if
Yes.
we're honest, and I try as best I can to be absolutely brutally honest, much sometimes to the alarm of people, if I'm honest, to the extent that these regional groups are having to form, that is a measure of the success of the globalization of the voice of ITA. It's
Yeah.
assuming the role at the UN.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, exactly, exactly, and that's also what Kim at Momentum and I partially addressed in our initial health assessment for the organization.
Mm.
So maybe I'm going to first jump now to two aspects of change management that I find endlessly fascinating, and it's a huge. Of course, by nature, it's a huge topic and a huge field of practice as well. But let me just pick two, and that is the psychology of organizational change. So, how do people respond to a significant organizational change when it is introduced? And how do politics and power play a role in it? And I mean politics with a small p, right? And power with a small p. So, I'm curious if you have observations on either as you drove change. Psychology of change, the power of and politics involved in change in the ITA context.
I think in the ITA context, the executive, the directors, if you like, of ITA, the first and most important thing is my recognition that I can do nothing without the directors, the other directors. And any one of those directors could be president. So it happens to be that I'm the president. And
Mm-hmm.
in our organisation, like I think most organisations, that's got to have a bit of luck, and you've got to hold your breath and light three candles and hope the wind's blowing in the right direction, and then
Yeah.
magically you become president. You think, well, why do we do that? But the president's position is just the visible face, or the more visible face. It's the one that takes the punch in the head. But
Mm-hmm.
it was recognizing that we've got a group of directors there whom are going to be accounting to all their member nations, because they have to be elected within their member nations, and recognizing that they won't necessarily be expressing their full views in our directors' meetings, and I won't necessarily know all their agendas in terms of their commercial drivers, their personal KPIs, and all those sorts of things. So I have to be very respectful and not ask too many questions about about the little p politics of what may
Mm-hmm.
happen as we go on our journey, because all of us need to be on the team. I can't do what I do if the other directors don't support it, or at least not either overtly or not so overtly try and undo whatever I'm up to. But
Right.
also, I have
Yeah.
to support what they're doing, because we had some really serious challenges. And so I have to support them, even if from time to time I don't agree, to the extent they have to agree with some of the stuff I do that they don't like. I also have to be respectful of the things that
Yeah.
they're doing that I might not. Because it's not like I'm a dictator. I'm just happen to be the president. So
No.
I can coax everyone in a particular direction, but I can't just mandate it.
No.
So
No.
that's so I think I learned to be better at delegating. I think if I had my time again, which I don't want, like I've had my time, that's it, I'm done. But or I will be. I think that delegation's important, and recognizing that people are under all sorts of pressures. I and also the organisation itself, the few staff that we have, and I'm not sure about your listeners, but I'm not imagining many of your listeners have got huge, incredible resources that are able to fund huge support staff, and we
No.
certainly don't. And in fact, not only don't we don't even have really an office. Well, we sort of have an office, but because of the way we're organised, at least at the time I'm talking to you, like like we're talking now, we don't really have an office, but we have really, really incredibly dedicated people working for us whose hearts are there for the organisation. So managing that, that's tricky. So we've got directors who are all volunteers. So we've got,
Exactly.
so there's no pay lever. Like even me, like I get nothing. I get zero support from my organisation financially.
Mm, mm.
All of us get zero support from ITA, and yet we volunteer because we want to make the world better.
And in
And
fact, I will mention that it was our observation of Kim and me that the volunteer board of directors were, um, um, yeah, you were in our observation at that time at least a hands-on board, right? That's.
yeah,
I'm not saying that whether that's good or bad, but you were and are probably right. Your volunteers are spending a lot of time on this professional association. And so is the case also for your working groups and committees, etc. Right? It's all
yeah,
volunteer. So I want our listeners also to understand this is a professional association that is also membership based and that is entirely driven or almost entirely driven by non-paid volunteers,
yeah.
correct?
And isn't that interesting? Because your listeners might think, what would a group of crusty engineer, nerdy
Hmm.
technician, why would they all be volunteers? Because you normally think of volunteers as, I don't know, not like us, like we're whatever we are.
You mean more social activist?
Yeah, yeah. So we're the most unlikely group of people who are so passionate about betterment of humanity, and yet, in a way, it's not surprising because we're so practical. Like we
Hmm.
know that if we clean the water, the lives of millions of people improve because through our careers we see it. This is where it's interesting. When we went into Mexico City and we put in the water supply and the sewage stuff, click, millions of people, suddenly their lives are better. So there's a very direct relationship between what we deliver and betterment of human beings. And with urbanisation accelerating, the need to help, actually it's probably more like billions of people, to bring them out of poverty, to give them half a chance.
Yeah.
We know that this lever that we control, we can deliver. We just have to persuade people to let us do our magic.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And now, in addition, to be fair, the professional association that you are is also about safe mandating or minimum quality standards, right?
yeah,
Coherent minimum quality standards across the world, right? It's about professional development of tunnel technicians and engineers, etc. And it's also about, in some cases, it's also about promoting the commercial
yeah,
incentives of
mm,
companies, right, that run
mm,
these tunnel
mm,
operations. So it's
mm,
a mix of motives, as is
yeah,
normal and totally fine, but that's you as a president have to also balance all these stakeholders,
mm,
if you will. So
mm,
from a change back to that topic of change management, whether it's about the psychology change or politics and power, by which I mean things like, people jockeying for position, people forming alliances and caucuses, right? You referenced one
mm.
already. Um, Competition, conflict, etc. Any other kind of lessons as you now step back after almost 3 years, what you've learned about those dimensions of change management?
I think the commercial supporters that we have are very sensitive to what we're doing because there's a tension between us being a credible, truly independent voice for the
Mm,
betterment of humanity, which is the sort of social dimension,
yeah,
and we want to sell diggers.
right.
Right? So there's whatever those diggers might be. So whether they're in the form of tunnel boring machines or road headers or what have you, and also the chemical companies and everything, because we are also highly supported by our industry. And that
Yes.
tension, and that's a tension because we need the support of our industry in order to
Yeah.
do what we do, even though we're volunteers.
Yeah.
And so equitably distributing the love amongst all of our commercial stakeholders is tricky. And so, and also because we produce position papers, state-of-the-art papers. What we produce a lot of the documentation that's relied on around the world for minimum standards for a whole range of things, from rock bolts to air quality to a whole lot. We produce a whole lot of stuff.
Environmental mitigation, etc.
Yeah, exploitation of workers like slavery. So remembering, in the countries who can least afford the infrastructure that we want to deliver, there's also huge incentives just to give as many people work as you can, whether they're skilled or not. Now that's a tension, because in giving so many people work, which itself becomes an enabler for them economically, you also run the risk of killing a metric ton of them because it's so dangerous. So we're really in a difficult.
You are.
There is no perfect answer. And one of my initiatives in my twilight, as I'm running into the end of my third year, I want ITA to establish a minimum set of competency standards for our workers. And the tension is the if you like, the developed world wants to set those standards to the developed world standards.
Yeah.
And I'm saying no. That is a form of colonialism, because in setting the standard to the developed world standards, you are actually denying countries the opportunity of developing because they can't afford that cost. And yet in that dialogue, implicit is a difference in the assessment of the value of a human life, right? So, and
Wow.
now there's no winner there. And so
No.
because I'm pragmatic, I'm saying, come on, we don't have to set the standard as the developed world standard. We need to set it as the very minimum that these men and women need to do their job competently.
And
Because
as safely as possible.
safely enoughly, right? Because they can't afford a robot. The high point at the moment, if you truly believe that you don't want to expose your workers to the risk of death and harm in the underground, you send a robot.
Yeah.
And so, and yet for governments in transformative stages where they've got huge poverty and people dying from waterborne disease and issues, like I'm thinking, say, Democratic Republic of Congo. I was meant to go there. Kinshasa has got huge issues with no sewage, and they're on the Congo there. And anyway, if you insist, and you might, if you're that's the other thing. We work with the development banks, the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank. So we've also got the development banks on our shoulders as well.
Yeah.
We're playing God in some ways, and that there's no winner there. But at the moment, there's no voice anywhere in the world for a minimum competency standard for the world, and as a result, in many places, the youngest, least skilled will seize the opportunity to go and work in one of our projects, and there's a likelihood they will die. And that, I think, is a pressing issue right now.
Yes, and I'm sighing at that. So you just point out a whole bunch of paradoxes, right?
Yeah.
And you're very transparent about those. I want to now go back to how you try to lead change, right? So you mentioned some of the agendas. We've talked about a few elements. What have you found most rewarding about trying to drive change in ITA? And what have you found most challenging or frustrating and trying?
Can I start with the most rewarding?
Yes.
Because I've loved being president, and it's given me an opportunity to not be throwing stones at someone, but to be having stones thrown at me because I'm trying to do stuff, and also with the board. And I feel privileged to somehow have navigated my life into a position of influence where I obviously, and my board has obviously been making a difference because of the kicking and squealing and all the other noise that's come from the people that we're obviously influencing. So
Mm,
that's got to be good, because so many of us never get into a position where we can actually do something. We're always talking about it, we're always critical, we're writing a report about, rah, 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 you should have done this and you could have done that and blah, blah, blah. So obviously something positive is happening. That is wonderful. Just that experience of being in the chair with the crew and us trying to steer this thing in a different direction. And I've loved that. What have I loved? We've got more young people, lots more young people. My emails, my social media, and I'm getting feedback from around the world. Young people, whatever it is we're doing, whatever noise we're making, whatever disturbances we've created, the
mm,
young ones like it. And one of the first issues we faced as ITA was that we were dying. We were dying because we were just a group of increasingly old men, the
mm,
few women, but not a lot of women, and our organisation's dying. Now, 3 years on, our young members are some of the most vibrant, noisy, productive members of our organisation. The network of young member organisations around the world has blossomed. They have their own
mm.
magazine. They share ideas. They have their own seminar series. So the even if us old blokes,
Yeah,
some of us are feeling a bit edgy about the change that's occurring, in a
yeah,
way it doesn't matter, because there's this wave now of young people who went, oh my God, being an engineer, which is what, my nana wanted me to do, or my grandpa, or whatever, actually is a way that I can change the world. Not just talk about it, actually change the world. And
yeah.
that here is a tangible career where you can have a legacy on the future of the planet. You can have a tangible legacy on environmental protection. You can have a tangible, like, how many careers do that? Well, probably many do, but we've been able to articulate it.
In
And
a
we've
much
got,
more clear way than what was in place before, right?
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And the young come. In fact, so much so that I don't now know what to do. I got so many messages from young people with career advice requests and wanting, where do I go to study? How do I study? I want to do this. I was doing such and such, but now I want to come back to engineering. You've made us think about the impact that we can make, as an individual, collectively. So the nice thing is, as a young person coming to our sector, they feel like they're on the good guys team. That
mm,
we're change makers, and we do it. And also they like the travel, because I often post from all sorts of exotic places, and they're like, oh my God, Arnold's insert the crazy place I am. I'm in the world's deepest underground construction zone in Africa. And the next minute I'm in Papua New Guinea, and then the next minute I'm in Pakistan, and then the next minute I'm wherever. And they see that the world isn't as big as they imagine. And they see that they also, this is the other thing I've learned, while my style of leadership might be a little unusual, young people relate to it, and they can imagine themselves being me,
mm.
because I don't come across as being a pompous old fart. I'm not sure how that translates for English as a second language, but um, I'm just Arnold, and I wear my emotions on my chin, and I'll take it for the team, and I encourage the people around. Like, I'd really try to get everyone to do what they can do best, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
maybe that's my leadership style. It's unusual though.
Well, that's what I said in the introduction. Um,
Mm.
can I encourage you to go towards what you have found most trying about when you tried to drive change in the or in inside the organization, right? Because after that, we'll have to bring it to a close fairly soon, and I want to hear you about that too.
What's really difficult is that change is frightening for people, and even if they might be aware that their organisation is sinking. Because actually, ITA didn't appear to be sinking. Actually, ITA is a very, very well established, very strong
Yeah.
commercially. It's not that it's a sinking organisation at all, but
Right.
the world needed, when we took over, we needed ITA. So the world needs ITA because of the
The
voice, because of the
relevance.
position. Yeah, the
I
relevance. So increasing the relevance of ITA also meant that it decreased the relevance of some voices within ITA.
Yeah.
Because and so there's enormous resistance to that in some sectors. And I didn't enjoy personal attacks. That's because that's in the professional sense, that's not what I'm used to. I'm used to more intellectual attacks. I didn't enjoy people making things up. So
Mm,
I'd hear back a narrative about something that I'd said or done or was going to do, like
mm,
imaginary Arnold.
hmm.
The imaginary Arnold is not going to respect the decision of whatever it might be because he's a tyrant. He'll just do what he wants, whatever. And real Arnold will go, "What are you talking about? Like, that's." So I didn't enjoy that. I don't like dealing with people's imaginations. I was very distressed, actually distressed, when I was doing one of my day jobs, and I actually had an inquiry about my own conduct, and that was when I was doing a particular task and made certain public declarations, which the organisation was worried those public declarations could adversely reflect upon the organisation if
Mm,
my public declarations proved to be wrong. And so there was a collision between my private world and what I
mm,
do as a day job and my role as a president.
mm.
So I didn't enjoy that. And also didn't enjoy the political playing games between the superpowers when um, when I would be doing something in a country which is an enemy of another country, and then the representatives or proxies for that other country would attack me
Right.
personally.
That's kind of
So
geopolitical
yeah, that
politics.
geopolitical, yeah. Um, and so I didn't enjoy that. But I also found there's a lack of maturity, and there's a lot of naivety amongst many of the technical people. Because remembering we're a technical organisation, we're not a political organisation.
Yeah.
And often the nerdy sort of tech people that we aren't sensitive to the geopolitical games that are being played by our leaders. And so that actually drives us into being pawns for the bigger geopolitical game. So I found that really interesting. So, for example, a dispute over a boundary of a country, which is a geopolitical issue, for the technical people within that country, they might not even know that it's an issue. For them,
Right.
it's just a given. Like that's just because of the way the politics work. So because we're technical people, we don't even know how we're being driven geopolitically. So that was hard.
Yeah, I
Um,
could imagine some really hard
yeah.
factors.
Really, and so that drives engineer against engineer. So you have really nerdy people from different countries actually fighting each other and not realizing that they've been set up to fight each other by their political leaders. And so I got vision of that. And it's made me even more passionate about the importance of us technical people to ignore the narrative from our geopolitical leaders because it
Mm.
actually gets in the way of us giving clean water and sewage and transport to our people. So our humanitarian delivery gets gets mucked up by all this
Mucked up. Yeah.
silliness from our
Yeah.
arts
Yeah.
friends or the politicians. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. Yeah. Okay, Arnold, this has been a wide-ranging conversation. I do want to ask, I'm sure that some of our listeners will say, I want to find out more about this person. I want to start following him as well on LinkedIn, etc. So where should people go if they want to find out more? First about ITA, most importantly, and then about you as well.
So the
And
best
the
place to go,
and that.
ITA. Yeah, so ITA, go to the website. Now, you have to put ITA, but International Tunnelling and Underground Space Association. So if you can't type all of that, just type in ITA tunneling. If you don't, you end up at ITA Airlines, which is a whole other story. And you can also end up, there's a few ITAs out there. We're the tunneling ones. So if it doesn't look like we're underground,
Go
you're at
for
the
that.
wrong
Yes.
website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll put
And
that in the show note, the correct URL.
yeah, oh great. And then if you want to know me, there's two versions of me you'll find. You'll
Okay.
find the more professional version of me on LinkedIn, just as Arnold Dix, the tunnel guy.
Yeah.
And I've very much simplified, like calling myself the tunnel guy. I know I probably shouldn't use the term guy, but it's just I do that because I think guy is also, for many people with English as a first language, non-gender specific. And if it's non-gender specific or you think it's gender specific, I don't mind upsetting people by using it because at least it grabs people's attention. It's like, oh my God, he's called himself the tunnel guy. How can he do that? And I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah.
Just that it's a little confronting. And then if you want to know the softer version of me on
Yeah.
Facebook, I'm Arnold. And there you can see, for example, the time-lapse sunrises that I do every morning and post. It's more the human Arnold, which people get a bit shocked about. They're like, "Oh my God, Arnold does sunrise photography every day." So that's the that's the softer version of me. And then on X, from time to time, I post as well, but I keep that to it's much lower volume, and that's where you'll find me. Or you
Good.
just Google search YouTube. Just type my name. Oh my God! If you go there, even I find stuff I didn't even know what I'm accused of having done. So there's lots on YouTube as well.
And
I
not
hope
just
you
what
enjoy it.
accused of having done, but also what you're celebrated for having done. And
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
listeners, we will not go into this, but there is a big story on YouTube about Arnold's role in a very high profile tunnel disaster, underground disaster in India, which we will not go into, but you will see an interesting video about that as well. So lots to draw our listeners to. So with that, Arnold, I have to say thank you for all the insights that you've given us. A lot of food for thought. I just immensely enjoy talking with you and listening, and I hope this will not be our last time. And listeners, if you found this podcast stimulating, then be sure to check out other episodes of my podcast as well. We have many about change, leadership, and change management. Too many to mention. You can find these on my website, fiveoaksconsulting.org, but also on my YouTube channel, which is a lot smaller for sure than that of Arnold. I also want you to know, listeners, about an interesting podcast, The Modern Humanitarian and Development Leader, with Tori Peace as a host, that Tori and I are co-hosting a two-part show together early this year, 2025. So if you manage or lead in the development sector and you will find value in listening to Tori's episode on the modern development and humanitarian leader, and we'll post that in the show notes. So with that, I hope you will subscribe to my email list through my website that I already mentioned, fiveoaksconsulting.org, and that you therefore will know about the next interesting podcast episode or blog, etc., that comes out. With that, I'm saying goodbye. See you next time on NGO Soul and Strategy.